You want that sweet, sweet inspiration, and you want some cool Bionicle MOCs? Well, you've come to the right place. This is the Bionicle Inspiration Series. Welcome. So, every 10th episode, I like to do a little fan-submitted MOCs episode. So, this episode is purely focused on, fan-submitted MOCs. You guessed it. How did you know? And if you're like, yo, what? How do I put my marks on this show? You do so through the email that you're currently seeing on your screen. Send me some pictures, some info, and a few other things that you want to throw in there, whatever that is. And it'll one day be on the show, whether that's the fan-submitted MOCs episodes or just the regular BIS. Anyway, let us begin. The first MOC that we've got we're going to be covering a lot, by the way, so just buckle in, buckle your pants. First MOC we've got today is by Paleobricks and is called Alien Arthropod. This guy's super cool, nice little tiny cute MOC with a lot of personality, and I don't know, it looks like something you'd see out of some science fiction thingamajig, whether it's a book or a movie or whatever, some cute little critter that maybe lives by the sea. Very cool. So he's got this Gadunka mask here being used as this sort of kind of crab shell of some kind. I'd never really even thought of using that part as a sort of shell for a little cute guy like that. Ingenious part use. Awesome how the textures of that very much work for that sort of thing. And also really cool how the mask sort of just flows down at the bottom there and kind of just gives a little bit of sort of a brow just above the eyes. Very, very nicely shaped there. Looks great. And I love that he's used one of those Baraki squid in blue there just to fill in the gap where Gadunka's eyes normally sort of came in relation to the mask. Just so that sort of gap there is no longer an issue and he's just covered it up very nicely, of course. Those squid pieces are kind of rubbery, so you could have easily just shoved them in there. Not officially, properly connected, but through friction it is. And it looks great and it works really well, so pretty cool. Also, these glow-in-the-dark pieces. I've said it a lot now, but I've kind of just come to realize just how versatile these glow-in-the-dark pieces are. One, glow-in-the-dark pieces are awesome because you can, turn the lights off and you got a whole nother MOC, basically, because it's glowing and it's great. But, this Gadunka mask and those Baraki shell pieces there in this sort of funky blue color that glows in the dark. I've seen them on so much stuff, and every MOC they've always been on has been so uniquely different in some way. So if you have any of these parts, you could so easily use those in a MOC, because go back and watch various episodes of BIS. I've spoken about these parts a lot, actually. They're very, very cool. Very, very useful. So yeah, this is an awesome, cute little guy that Mr. Paleobricks here has made. Nice work. Let's move on to the next MOC. It is Cordax by Daniel Bannister. So I like the little necklace that this guy's got here. Pretty cool. Nice use of the Lego chain piece. Really, it's kind of the ideal piece you could use for any kind of necklace or additional jewelry on a Bionicle MOC, and it's just a fun little addition that you can add on to any Bionicle, giving him a nice necklace or something, just a little bit of bling, a little bit of something, a nice accessory that, could relate to their story in some way, or just adds a bit more character to the MOC, and it's cool. I also love the coat that this guy has here. I want to say that's the Obi-Wan Kenobi cloak, or it could just be a custom cloak, I'm actually not sure. But I really like the way that he's layered it onto the MOC here, putting the rubber band there on the waist. Just the way it kind of flows off like that, because it is sort of being pushed in with that rubber band in the center. Kind of gives it this interesting kind of wizard or kind of monk look, slightly kind of Jedi in some way. It's just a very simple way of using that cloak, but it does a lot more for the character, and it creates a very distinctive, different look to what I've seen on any other kind of MOCs that use cloaks in funky, cool ways. And so yeah, I really like that. And of course, I don't believe that is an official Lego rubber band, but Lego has many official rubber bands, so you could easily do that in a very, very purist way, and it creates a very interesting look. And I've said it before as well, adding cloaks onto MOCs is always super smart, because, if some areas of the MOC don't look as good, just cover them up with a cloak. That's not to say this MOC doesn't look good without the cloak. It actually looks pretty fantastic without it, but maybe you're building something, you're like, I don't know how to do these upper legs. How do I do this? Give them a nice little loincloth or a little dress or a waistcoat or something, and then you just don't have to worry about them at all because they get covered up. It's cheating, but it gets the job done, and often I think cloaks actually add a bit more kind of depth or more interesting aesthetics or looks to a MOC. So something to think about. Also, this MOC's got some cool weapons here. These two little pistols, or this little weapon he's got here. Just one of those Rakshi blades, but it works. It's like a little dagger or something. Very simple weapons, but very effective, and sort of say a lot about the character. Pretty cool. It's very nice work. Let's move on to the next MOC, and this is a MOC by Bethany Mars, and this is called Beelzebub, the Beast. So I really like the devil horns that he's put on here. Of course, those Paraka heads did have a little kind of axle there, which you kind of shove through to connect the glowing eye piece into it. But of course, you could have connected a larger axle into it and had a little connection point there. So the perfect thing to add some horns or something there. And surprisingly, those Paraka heads actually fit those devil horns very, very well. So that's super cool to see, and it's a nice addition if you're planning on using a Paraka head in some way. Really, really cool. And of course, fitting for Beelzebub, of course, being the devil, so giving him sort of horns like that seems fitting. But I also really love the arm design that he's got here. He's got the typical normal arm design with those sort of posable fingers, but then he's got this kind of Freddy Krueger-like kind of knife finger kind of design there. Very cool. I love the asymmetry between the two, giving one arm more of a kind of prominent weapon and the other arm just being a typical arm. It's a very unique weapon. Not surprisingly, not one I've seen that commonly on Bionicle MOCs. I've seen them now and then, but with how popular Freddy Krueger is in sort of horror culture, I definitely thought that I would have seen that a little bit more. So very unique and very, very cool weapon. Also like the fact that this is more of a sort of Titan-sized build. It's a lot larger and stuff. But we take a look at the legs here. It's a fairly simplistic design using a lot of prefab limbs with a little bit of armor put on top of them, or your basic Hero Factory stuff with Hero Factory bones and limbs and stuff like that. And he's created the kind of digigrade leg design for it too, very fitting with the devil look. But it's just the fact that he's just kind of kept stacking them up, and now they're a lot larger and a lot bigger. So interesting to note that you can build a Titan-sized MOC and it not really use all that many pieces to achieve the sort of larger size. And of course, doing that with the larger legs, he's just kind of compensated with the rest of the body, giving him a very long body, long arms and stuff, and then more or less it's still in proportion with, your typical human proportions. He's just a bit larger. That said as well, though, like he's a demon dude, so he doesn't really need to have typical human proportions, so the fact that he is a bit, not really lanky, I wouldn't say he's that lanky, but, the fact that he has longer limbs and stuff like that, that kind of works, I always say, you don't need to be sticking to set proportions, you can make up your own. It's, you're making your own unique character, you can do what you want. But yeah, great to see a Paraka head being so effectively used here on this very menacing, awesome Titan MOC. Let's now move on to the next MOC. And this is a MOC by Of Ruin and Glory. And his MOC is called Callen Asha. So one of my favorite things about this MOC is the posing that he's got for it. The way that his arms are kind of lifted up like that, and his claws are kind of facing down. And then he's also got this kind of hunched neck, and so he kind of looks like this little kind of evil, scary demon guy kind of hunched over, a little bit like an Igor or something. He's a little thing that you don't really want to mess with. And the majority of that is just down to how this MOC is being posed. I think a lot of that is in the arms and the claws and how they kind of just how they're posed there like that. That's something to consider. Maybe you are building a Bionicle MOC and you kind of want this specific look for it, and you're kind of thinking of all these ways that you can design the limbs to be doing this sort of thing. But really, if you just pose it in a certain way, it could achieve the look that you're after. Or, additionally, you could just take the MOC that you currently have and put it in some more interesting poses, and as a result it conveys a little bit more character. Typically to do that you would need a more sort of posable MOC, of course, but for that matter, maybe you don't. Maybe you want to have the limbs be positioned in a set way so that he does have this more sort of sinister looking hand design, or more athletic looking leg design, or something like that. And yeah, as a result you're conveying a lot more character. And I always think that MOCs that convey a lot more character are some of the more interesting ones to look at, because a story starts to form, you get an idea of who they are and what they are, and it's the reason that you fall in love with, superhero characters or cool anime characters or video game characters, is because you see their character progression, you learn who they are, and you can relate to them in some way. So if a MOC conveys some sense of personality and a story starts to form, or you kind of get an idea of who they are, you're able to connect with it in more of a unique and interesting way. And, the people looking at your MOC will like it more, or you might just like it more because, now this guy, he's got a story behind him, and he's not just, some dude that you built, Not that there's anything wrong with just some dude that you built, but, if you want to take it to a different level, I'd recommend trying to implement some sort of story or a bit more personality behind the character, because that's where the MOCs will really shine. But yeah, I spoke about the little neck hunch that he's got there. Kind of reminds me of just, the neck hunch that Onawa G1 originally had, the original Onawa Mata, of course. I remember talking to Shadowgear in the past, and he always said that the Onawa hunch, that's what really made the character for him. So, designing a MOC to have more of a kind of hunch with its neck design like that, and again, is a great way to convey character. Also love that he's used a bunch of these orange panel pieces that came on one of the old, well, it's not that old now, it's only a few years old now, but the big orange Technic Porsche there, using those panel pieces there on the shoulders. I think that really helps with this sort of hunched over look, makes him look a bit more menacing. But also he's got one of these Technic panel bits there sort of towards his waist, kind of forming this interesting kind of loincloth kind of thing, or just some sort of interesting element of the design. Could even be a tail or something. Just looks really cool. It's a nice little addition, but it does a lot. Also a cool color scheme too, the black and the orange, very sinister looking, very nice. It's a nice work of Ruin and Glory. Let's move on to the next MOC. It is a MOC by Fruto Bandido, and is called Zeus, the Last Titan. So here we actually see another type of necklace on a MOC. This one, very similar to the last one we saw, using those Lego chain pieces, but it doesn't have any kind of jewel or, interesting little thing on the end of it. It's just a simple chain, It's another way of doing it. Very simple, very effective, but it does a bit for the character. But overall, this MOC has a very sort of detail-heavy look to it. It's got some nice additions as well, like the little sort of turbines there on the shoulder, kind of lower arms there, giving him, kind of really focusing in on details and greebles. That could be the building style that you like to aim for, is packing in as much detail as you can, and then finding, interesting pieces like that turbine piece, or, just a few studs or some other interesting stuff, just to really pack in the details onto the MOC. That might be where you shine. When I'm building system, I always love to pack in as much detail as I can, and sort of think about how this diorama could be very much lived in. That's more or less the same thing with a character. Maybe you want to pack in a whole bunch of detail, and you go, okay, so this character, this is his story, so okay, he's traveled, he probably has like a backpack with some scrolls or some rations or food or something inside it. He probably also has a key or a sword that he got on his travels. Maybe he's got a necklace that a former loved one gave him or something. Little stuff like that really helps to kind of illustrate more of a character. That sort of stuff can really make a MOC shine, and on this more sort of detail-heavy style of building, that stuff can really, shine through, which is awesome. So overall, a big sort of menacing, another kind of Titan build here. Powerful, kind of godlike stance and structure to this guy. Awesome weapon. He looks pretty cool. Nice work. Let's move on to the next one. This is a MOC by Joxon and is called Mr. Dozer. So obviously some pretty heavy Transformers inspiration here on this MOC, and it looks pretty awesome as a result. Love the head design there, especially the little mouth bit there, using a system kind of, I believe that would be a 1x1 piece with the clip on the end there. That's how he's attached. You can see that exact same piece that I was referring to, just above it, sort of connecting the nose there. And also I just kind of realized that nose bit in yellow just above it that clip is clipping onto, that is a Friends sort of like egg beater thing, like the thing you use to make cakes or something. Very, very nice part use there. Very, very effective. But yeah, that head is very, Michael Bay Transformers-like in design. Looks fantastic. Looks very, very cool. And overall, yeah, this does have a lot of that kind of Transformers flair to it. There's a very greeble-heavy look to it, and the kind of greebles there on the torso look very nice, using a bunch of these sort of grill pieces and a few other things to kind of give it this very mechanical flair and vibe. Looks fantastic. And I really love this gun design here. Very, very system-heavy, but the little addition I love so much is the little sort of data readout thing that's popping out on the side there, the little trans blue tile there that's printed as well. Came with a little data pad thing that came with one of the Hero Factory minifigures from the Invasion from Below's side of Hero Factory. Very nice little addition there. Kind of reminds me of something from Halo or something like that. The nice little thing to add to a gun. And also some very nice color blocking on this as well. Kind of having the yellow be the sort of armor on top, and then the underneath is all that sort of greebled mechanical details and stuff. Very fitting, And that's very much kind of what even Michael Bay Transformer stuff looked like, is underneath most of them did have that sort of very greeble heavy look to it, and then they had these sort of additional armor on top that was the color of, whatever the Transformers color was. So nice to see that that's kind of been translated over, because obviously this does have that Transformers vibe, although the disclaimer that Joxon has posted here does not actually transform into a Dozer. All the other giant robots make fun of him for that. Poor guy. Regardless though, he's super cool. If he's getting made fun of, we'll be here to cheer him on, because we love how he looks. Nice work, Joxon. Let's move on to the next MOC. This is a MOC by a one Nick Maple Juice, and his name is Pyrrol. So you see another necklace, kind of, sort of. Again, just using that chain piece, but it's being attached in a slightly different way. Instead, it's kind of more sort of over the side. So maybe it's less of a chain, and maybe it's more sort of more of an ornate chain, less of a thing that goes around his neck, and more kind of something that goes across the armor, kind of like the chains that people can wear on their belts or something like that. I don't know. It's a different way of approaching it, but it still looks cool and kind of ties in very nicely with the printed armor piece that he's got here, which does actually have chains printed on it as well. So really cool that he's continued that across and actually kind of given a bit of depth as well. So having the chain be off of that printing, because otherwise, it's... Well, I always find that whenever I'm making minifigures, I always like to put sort of a cloth element on them, or give them sort of like a bag over the side or something like that, just to sort of give them a bit of depth, because often all the printing is printed on the minifigure torso, and so stuff doesn't really pop, whereas if you look at actual people, of course their clothes give them depth, and they've got like a helmet over the top, so you get kind of interesting shapes forming and stuff like that. And so if a minifigure is all kind of printed, sometimes they can lose a bit of depth, or not look as kind of dynamic or realistic. So I like to add like cloth or chains or blah blah blue onto them, just to give them a bit of depth, and I think that always works, and I think this works very well here. Also really like the sword design on this. Nothing cooler than an awesome flame sword. Very nice use of that part there, and just adding a whole bunch of other stuff around it to kind of give it more of a sort of ornate hilt, and just sort of make it look like a more of a menacing looking sword. Very, very cool. And also too, the color blocking on this is pretty cool, kind of how the silver looks like additional armor that's being placed over the top of the of red. And then I think it's very fitting to add those Onawa sort of kicker pieces onto those Mutter feet, because it kind of looks again like he is actually putting armor over the top of the red. Because I always thought those pieces very much looked like some sort of physical addition that Pahatu would have to put on. So sort of seeing it again on this, that sort of gets carried across. And yeah, it looks like he's very much wearing armor over the top of him. So he looks more kind of knight-like to that degree, which I like. Very cool. So yeah, nice stuff, good sir. Let's move on to the next mock. And this is a mock by Sonic Bionicle Master, and it is called Astros the Ethereal. So really nice color scheme here. He very much seems sort of very sinister and evil. These blacks and these purples kind of adds this flair of evil, but also sort of mystery or magic or power or something like that. Very cool. Also really like the head design there. Using that Nuva shoulder piece there is awesome for a head, and then adding the claws on the side there, giving him horns. He looks evil and sinister. We also mentioned capes before. Here's another cape design, which I think really helps improve the mock. It's a sort of flowing cape. You see it on basically every Sith Lord, whether it's Darth Maul, Darth Sidious, or Darth Vader. All of them have that sort of flowing cape, sort of kind of embodies and symbolizes this sort of evil flowing out of them, you know, kind of as the cape flows, so does their sinister ways and their dark side powers and stuff like that. And I think, again, this is quite fitting for the look that this mock has. And additionally, with that, this mock's got a whole bunch of spikes all over it, whether it's, you know, spikes on the feet, the claws that he's got, the spikes on the head, even the sword kind of has this spiky nature to it, or just simply using these trans-purple armor pieces, which are naturally quite spiky in design. So these repeated spikes being used, again, that kind of adds to this evil flair and evil look that he's got going on, and it's pretty cool, I think. So it's also something to consider, you know, what sort of parts do you want to use and how could they reflect a type of character, or reflect maybe the allegiance that the mock has. You know, maybe they're a super bad guy, so you want spikes and evil-looking stuff all over them. Or maybe they're a good guy, and so you don't really want to go too spiky with the design, and instead you want it to be a bit more sort of smooth and reflective of all the good qualities that character has. Or maybe they're sort of a little bit in between, so you kind of want to balance levels of smooth or sort of more harder dynamic edges or rougher textures or something, so that there's elements of bad and elements of good, but all rolled into one edgelord style character. Could be pretty cool. And that's the thing too, if you want to buy any cape pieces, there's a whole bunch of them that came with the Star Wars Ultra Build sets, and that was the last thing that we got from Construction, and more or less some of those should still be available in your local shops, whether that's, you know, Target, Walmart, Kmart, Maya, depending on where you live in the world. Some of them are still available, or you could pretty much get them quite easily and quite cheaply online. And then, yeah, basically all of them came with capes, so you could play around with some of those. Easy. Or heck, you can even play around with some of the kind of more plastic things that you get with Ninjago sets. You know, a lot of the dragons, their wings are that sort of interesting plastic material. And more or less, you could use those as sort of, you know, cape elements, depending on the look of the actual cloth element there. Or you just use them for other additional elements on a mock. You never know what, you know, it might work with. Something to play around with, see what you can come up with. So anyway, nice work, Sonic Bionicle Master. Let's move on to the next mock. This is a mock by Bruno Guy. And the mock is called Elder Blazing Blacksmith of Fire. So I really like the idea of his head literally just being a big old flame. But the fact that that flame piece kind of actually does have a little bit of an eye on it almost. You kind of can see just towards the bottom there is that sort of circle on it, which you could make out to be an eye. So I kind of like the idea that he's this sort of fiery being made of pure fire, but he does have that little eye there or something like that. Interesting idea to use that as a little headpiece there. I think it's pretty cool. And also I like the big old hammer that he's got. You know, he said he was a blacksmith. Very much the perfect weapon for a blacksmith, especially one that is engulfed in fire. Very, very fitting for him crafting his weapons. So some nice, interesting takes on the character, making them be a sort of fire elemental, but also having their weapon be very much themed for their craft. It's pretty cool, I think. And I like the fact that he's got these asymmetrical arms here. One of them kind of has a little bit more gunmetal on it. Could be a little bit of an allusion to him having more of a robot arm or something. It might not be, but that's at least food for thought. The fact that simply putting gunmetal on an arm could allude to a more robotic arm design, and that's kind of all that you need to do to convey that to some degree. So it's something to think about. Pretty cool. Nice work there, Mr. Bruno Guy. I like what you have done. Let's move on to the next mock. This is a mock by John Anua, and it's called Elemental Warrior Kin version 3. So I really like the edits that he's got going on here. This galaxy background looks pretty cool. He's also got some images here showing the frame behind the mock as well, sort of taking all the armor off, and this is just the bare bones of it. And that's pretty cool. And you can see a few builders who do that as well. They'll take off all the armor and just sort of show the basic frame, and then everything else gets put on top, and he's got the finished mock. And I think that's a really good way of kind of being able to reverse engineer a mock, is either A, you just straight up see pictures like this and you go, oh, cool, I could easily rebuild that now that I see none of the armor on it. I can more or less see how everything's been built, so I'll do that myself. Or instead, you take a look at a mock and you stare at it long enough until you pay very specific attention to what the frame of the mock would look like, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I could do that, and you play with your pieces until you get something that looks pretty much the same as it. And then you go about adding on armor and a few other additional things and changing it up in a few ways, and then you've got a pretty nice frame to work around with. And basically, you take a look at any of the CCBS sets, whether it's Hero Factory or G2, and most of them are using a very basic frame and then adding armor on top of it. So that could be a starting point for you. Maybe just don't even worry about the armor or what the torso is going to look like or the legs or whatever. Just build a very basic frame, whether that's even just pretty much using ball joints and axles or straight up Hero Factory bones or prefab limbs or whatever. Build the frame and then armor it up. And then that way you don't have to worry too much about, is this going to work? Does this go into this? You go, no, I'll just build the frame for now, and you've got a very nice starting point. And that way as well, you've already started the mock, because often starting can be the hardest part. So that's cool. And maybe this frame design here could be a nice stimulus for something that you're working on. But yeah, this mock looks great. Love the color scheme, and I love the sort of shoulder pads that he's got here, using those leg guard pieces that came on a bunch of the Glatorian sets, and adding them up the top there as sort of shoulder pads or something like that. Looks pretty cool. And overall, a very cool mock. Nicely done. Let's move on to the second last mock of this episode, and this is a mock by Bonkle Mockist 2K4. And the mock's name is Akai, Toa of Time and Shadow. It's a really cool custom painted mask that's been done here, kind of giving him this sort of split face or two-face kind of design here. So one half of him is sort of very orange heavy, the other side is very black heavy, and so it kind of looks like he's being infected somehow. And just all these little lines that he's drawn there onto the mask. Looks pretty cool. Looks like this sort of infection that's infecting him, kind of almost a bit similar to Venom or something. Looks pretty badass. Also, we take a look at the hands here. Your typical finger design that you would have seen, actually. Some of the other mocks in this episode already used it, but you would have seen it a bunch of times on other episodes of the show, using those T-bar pieces, very similar to how Hydraxon used them. Instead, he's kind of done a slight variation of it, and he's used a Technic brick that had the axle connection in it, and then he's attached this 1x2 plate with the bar on the side, and then attached 3 fingers instead of the typical 2 for that T-bar design that we normally see. That's a nice little variation on that, nice way of doing that arm design. And so maybe you're like, I'd love to do the fingers, but I don't have any of those T-bars left. Well, maybe if you've got those 2 system pieces, you can very easily do that yourself, and it's a slight variation on the arm design, and it also gives you a bit of room to kind of add a bit more detail, because you've still got the studs there on those Technic bricks, so you could easily add, a few little studs or some other kind of detail there, maybe some knuckle dusters, or, that could be a place for some guns or some weapons or something. An interesting point that you can kind of play off of and continue to use and play with. I also like the fact that he's got these horns coming out of the holes that are typically on this mask. I don't know if you can just naturally shove them in, or if you need to, cheat and put a little bit of blue tack or something in there just to kind of lock them in place, but I'd have to actually try that myself, I'm not sure. But besides the point, a whole bunch of masks do actually have those little connection points on them where you could easily shove in pieces, and it works. So you can always kind of play around with your masks even further in that regard. So if you've got some lying around, try putting some pieces in some places that pieces might fit into and see what works. So awesome mock, good sir. Love the concept that you're playing with here. Let's move on to the final mock, and this is a mock by Leonid Arn and is called Diligiditus, the Fairy Dragon. So I love the stand that this mock has here, this big old log and then some grass under it and stuff and flowers everywhere. Very pretty, very nice looking. But then this beautiful dragon is sitting on top of it, and it uses a bunch of elves pieces, of course. The girl Lego, the old theme, elves, very, very cool theme. And a bunch of those sets came with some really awesome dragons that actually were pretty good parts-wise, and you could easily use them in any kind of Bionicle mock. They had those cool wing pieces, they had the awesome head design things there, and they came with some really nice colors that you could very much implement into your own mocks. And then you get some funky colors like, magentas or purples or spring greens or whatever, and you get to play around with that sort of stuff instead of maybe your typical silvers and blacks. You can really branch out and use some fancy, fun-to-use colors. So I love the fact that the belly on this guy is literally just that one piece of the balloon part. So you kind of get 8 of those together, and you can kind of create this sort of solid, like, hot air balloon kind of design. But those parts have been used in all sorts of different ways, and they're actually quite a versatile, awesome piece. And using one of them here to kind of form the general shape of the belly, and then it kind of flows up into the neck. I think that's really cool, that one piece that actually covers so much of that mock and is actually so important to the mock too, you know, it very much forms the whole shape of this guy. It's very fitting and very cool. And maybe that's something you can do. You pick out one part and you stare at it long enough and then you go, actually, hey, you know what, this could be a head design, or this could be a part of the back or something, or like this, the belly. And as a result, you've kind of got one part that actually forms the majority of the mock, and then then that way you don't have to use, thousands upon hundreds of pieces. You can kind of use one part that takes up the bulk of the space on the mock. And you put in the rest of the mock behind it, or in front of it, or to the side of it, wherever, and you got a mock going. And man, I know so many builders who, that's basically their stimulus into building a mock, is they just get one piece and they go, this is super cool, I want to build something with it, and then the rest of the mock comes. So do that, find a piece, do it right now, find a piece, look at it and go, you know what, maybe I can make a mock with this. Maybe that won't be that quick of a process, but go out, look at your pieces, see what ones might spark a mock idea, or maybe there is that piece that's been sitting in a bin for ages and you've gone, I want to build a mock with this, and you just haven't yet. Now's the time. You're waiting for the sign from the universe to tell you, you need to build. Here it is. I'm telling you now, you need to build with it. You've got that cool idea, don't hide it under a bushel, you're gonna let it shine. But otherwise, some nice other details on this mock, this little staff and this key on the side there, very cool. And then some other Ben 10 and Bionicle pieces here on the legs. So some very nice transitions from Bionicle into system. Those parts flow beautifully together and look fantastic. So nice work, Leonid. And nice work to all the 12, was that 12? Yeah, that was 12 mocks, 12 fan-submitted mocks, and I still have a lot more to cover in future, but don't let that discourage you from submitting your own to the show, because you of course can. And I already told you how you can at the start of the episode, and if you forgot, head back to the start of the episode, because that's where I said so. Thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed the episode, see you in the next one, have a great day.